Hello everyone, this is Brain's Journey, and welcome back to another information element lecture. Today we're wrapping up the last of the irrational functions. From now on, the next 4 videos will be on rational functions. So let's get into it. Today we're talking about NI, or introverted intuition. This was a heavily requested lecture. I mean, I was going to get to it anyway, but this was one of the ones that people wanted to see the most. So I tried to be as comprehensive as possible with it. So let's go over some alternative names like we always do. NI can be seen as a white triangle in contrast to the black triangle of extroverted intuition. It's also called white intuition correspondingly. As well as that, it's also called temporal intuition. As we see with extroverted intuition was intuition of possibilities. This is more intuition of time. And also the Latin name tempus, which is abbreviated to T at times. So what about the logical definition? What is strictly, the baseline first principle of this element? Well, NI perceives information about the sequence of events, their cause and effect relationship, and the purpose or the meaning of said events. And to illustrate this even more, we'll go into some concepts that are tied to NI. These are taken from Tensor's article. You can see all of the others in the description. It doesn't talk about just this one. Let's get to some concepts. We got some concepts laid out like we normally do. The first one that I want to talk about is transformation. NI is very aware of when things are either progressing or stagnating, the direction that something is taking. Trajectory is a very important concept for NI. It's the thing that guides NI's thinking pattern. It's very aware of the direction that something is going, maybe the branching pathways, how things are progressing, the speed at which they're progressing, also when something is not in movement, as I just went over. The whole process of transformation and movement in the direction of some kind of goal or aspiration, or just a path on a sequence of events, like I said earlier, is very much related to that concept of transformation. Another thing that could kind of go hand in hand with that is guidance. So NI is all about focusing, like I said, on a trajectory, and since guidance is all about leading people on a certain trajectory or on a certain growth path, NI is very connected to the concept of guidance in that it wants to help along the process, perhaps become aware of the process, and engage other elements to manipulate the process maybe, or it can be involved with a lot of different things, but guidance as a whole is just related to the manual change of certain trajectories. So that's why I thought it would be important to include that as well. We also have consequences of either the self or others, just consequences in general. Perhaps it's thinking, well, on a certain trajectory, what will happen, the cause and effect relationship, what will happen if this goes on this specific trajectory, and it sees the pathways, it sees this narrow vision of what will happen in the future. It's very intimately aware of the consequences of events, the effects of the actions that people take, and the sort of long-term effects of real-world processes, or maybe abstract processes. Could be any process, but it just sees the outcome and how the process will lead to that outcome in the future. As well as that, it focuses on priorities. So as we talked about earlier, we have guidance, is making sure we're on the right trajectory, making sure other people are on the right trajectory. That also is in accordance with priorities. If NI sees that perhaps a certain outcome is desirable, it will adjust its course, adjust the sequence of events to allow for those things to express themselves properly. And so it is good at seeing how outcomes can be engineered to produce different goals, solve different problems, and so it often aligns itself with certain priorities that it would like to accomplish itself. But it does not do the accomplishing itself. It is only predicting what kind of outcome will occur at that time. So that's more or less what that means. As well as that, and a more or less unrelated concept, we have significance and depth. So as NI is sort of seeing the outcomes of these events, seeing the trajectories, It wants to know why these specific trajectories are coming to pass, why these processes are leading to certain outcomes. And so it very much focuses on the significance of events, the depth of events, how complex is an event, how many multi-layered dimensions does it have to it, and how do those things get reflected across different time periods. So it's very, very focused on significance and meaning, the meaning of events. How are we to interpret how important things are? And I guess this also ties into priorities. How are we to determine which outcomes are more important for our personal well-being? How are we to determine which outcomes are more important for the societal well-being? And so NI is very focused on interpreting information about significance. As well as that, we have interpretations. So this is more or less a, connected to the significance part. And a lot of people would say that interpretations are connected to NE. And in a sense they are, but NE reflects on interpretations simply for the purpose of corrugating different possibilities, seeing which possibilities will stand up, which ones are the most beneficial. NI is doing a similar thing, except it's analyzing this with straight cause and effect relationships and sequence. It's seeing how different interpretations of certain events can lead to a different outcome. And so it's very narrow interpretation focused. So it'll take other people's interpretations, weigh them according to what is the most beneficial outcome, and it will always choose the best interpretation, whereas NE will mostly consider all the different interpretations equally, and I will look at all the different interpretations, but know that overall there is one best interpretation that it is striving to reach in its goals, aspirations, guidance, priorities, etc. So that's more or less the difference between NI and NE in that regard. As well as that, we have archetypes. So we also see with significance, as NI is analyzing the significance of certain events, processing the meaning, it starts to notice patterns across different events, patterns across different outcomes, different sequences of events and cause and effect relationships, and it manages to clump these sorts of patterns together into what are known as archetypes, or kind of shared groupings of human experience that can be slotted into certain categories. And so you have archetypes like the wise old man that appear in stories that were charted by Jung. You have the anima and the animus, or perhaps story archetypes, anything that has to do with repeating themes, significance-based outcomes, fits into the ideal of archetypes, something that NI very much focuses on. I'm back. Sorry for the cut. I was being a little bit redundant with the whole archetypes thing. But yeah, basically what I wanted to say was that archetypes fit into the whole process of NI, how it judges the effects of different timelines, and how it breaks down the purpose into different categories. So let's move on. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was nuances and caveats, representing a sort of positive-negative dynamic to the way that NI analyzes different events. A nuance is something like a subtle pattern that will help NI gauge whether or not it contributes to a certain outcome or not. And then a caveat is something that NI would judge as malicious to the process, something that would prevent a certain outcome from coming to pass. So basically, NI is very aware of all of these subtle dynamics of the way that information is moving through time, and it's able to judge these things and adjust accordingly towards certain processes. The last thing I wanted to talk about is certainty and uncertainty. So as NI explores all the different themes and all the different archetypes throughout its experience, it forms certain opinions on whether something is certain or whether something is uncertain, as processed from its whole experience of these events. Transformative processes, consequences can judge whether things are going to come to pass or not going to come to pass, or perhaps somewhere in the middle. So now that we've gone over a lot of concepts that are tied to NI, I want to go over some behavioral manifestations that can present itself when NI is being expressed. So one thing that we look at when NI is being represented through behavior is that it enjoys having a specific plan in mind for future circumstances. Now this seems somewhat self-explanatory. All the stuff that we talked about NI organizing different possibilities, seeing how things will come to pass, it's only natural how behaviorally NI will represent itself as developing outcomes for certain events, sticking to plans, and seeing how the cause and effect relationships will lead to certain events. So an NI expressed will see itself doing a certain action and adjust specifically according to that. As well as this, it often doesn't entertain the concept of living in the moment. This is more of a comparison to SI. So SI is going to be more focused on balance and harmony, whereas NI is not going to be focused on all these things in the moment. It's going to be either focused on the future and how future events are going to impact well-being, or how past events affected well-being now. And so NI is focused generally on all of the things that aren't the present moment, because it's constantly having to process things that are related to the events going on around it. Another contrast with SI will often engage in leisure activities simply for pure leisure, for pure relaxation. NI users, since they're always processing things, will engage in leisure activities. However, these leisure activities generally always invoke a psychologically demanding aspect, because they're even in their leisure time, even while resting, quote, resting, NI is putting background processes together, processing things, combining things together. And so while doing a psychologically demanding task to pass the time, NI is organizing all of these things that it needs to function on a daily basis. As well as that, NI possesses vivid mental imagery. There's emphasis on memories and dreams because of all these different pathways that objects can take, the different outcomes, themes, archetypes of experience. It's no wonder that NI would possess such perhaps artistic representations of how events go, perhaps. That's one way to word it. And then the last behavior that we're focusing on here is it recognizes how processes unfold over time. This is pretty much what we talked about the whole time. Thought I'd include it anyway because it is a relevant aspect of behavior. So, what did we go over today? We went over some alternative names as we always did, the definition, concepts tied to NI. We got like transformation, significance, all these things that are related to trajectories, and how NI is adjusting itself to match the outcome of events and how things are proceeding. And then the NI user is always focused on having a plan in mind, processing things in the background, and adjusting itself to outside circumstances. So if you enjoyed the lecture, make sure to hit that like button. And if you want to see more, then subscribe. We got a lot more information element stuff coming up. So yeah, I'll see you all in the next lecture.